All right, Alexander, let's talk about what's going on the ground in Ukraine. And we have Russian General Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu the other day coming out with a statement saying that the Russians have indeed taken control of Svyatogorsk, that town in that area, as well as 15 other villages in and around the Donbass. And this was a big statement because Shoigu does not make many statements. So this is significant. I feel it's significant. What's your take on things? We also have confirmation with Severodonetsk as well that the Russians pretty much control most of that area except for the industrial part. Kind of looks a little bit like Mariupol. But what is your take on the situation? Remember, it was just 3 weeks ago that Shoigu was suffering from a heart attack. And now here he is.
He was suffering from a heart attack. He was out of favour. He was being sidelined. He was going to be sacked. He seems very much in charge. Let's simply say that. I mean, one has to be... Shoigu, the case of Shoigu is a good example why one must be incredibly sceptical about all of these stories about Putin having cancer or Parkinson's or all the rest and all the other things that we hear coming out of Russia. But let's now focus on what he said. You're quite right. He said that they've captured Svyatogorsk, which is an important town in this part of Donbass, northern Donbass. There are separate reports, by the way, that the Russians are now within 15 kilometers of a town called Bakhmut. Bakhmut is the main rear area, the main base that the Ukrainian military has in this part of Donbass. It's actually visited by Zelensky just a few days ago, and it seems that Bakhmut is about to, come under attack as well. And if it does, by the way, if Bakhmut falls, if the Ukrainian military fall there, then the whole northern Donbass front collapses, and perhaps the entire Donbass front collapses. That's how important it is. And in Severodonetsk, you're absolutely right. The Russians control all the residential area. You remember all the talk about the counteroffensive that we've been hearing about, and how the Ukrainians had recaptured half the city. Turned out it was all fiction. The Russians are now in full control of all of the city. They've also captured the airport, small airport, but there was one. All that's left is the industrial zone outside the city in its suburbs, which in essentials means the Azot chemical works. Now we're hearing reports that the Ukrainians are pulling back from that area as well. Apparently the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, a man called Zaluzny, General Zaluzny, has finally persuaded Zelensky that holding on to this factory area is hopeless, it's pointless, it's a waste of the lives of brave men, and he's finally prevailed on Zelensky to order a retreat from the chemical works, the Azot chemical works. Now, by the way, I should say that this has come a day after the British media were reporting that Zelensky was saying that the Battle of Donbass was going to be decided in Severodonetsk. In other words, that if Ukraine loses Severodonetsk, then that means that it has lost the Battle of Donbass. I mean, that's an exaggeration on Zelensky's part, but it's what he said. And a day after he said it, it looks as if the Ukrainians are going to pull out of Severodonetsk. It's another reason why one shouldn't take too seriously what Zelensky said. Anyway, these are the military developments. In my opinion, there's an even more consequential political, economic development. And again, it relates to things that Shoigu said at the same Ministry of Defense meeting. Now, what he said at that Ministry of Defense meeting is that the land bridge linking Russia and Crimea is now completed and in operation. In other words, that the Russians have restored all the road and railway links from Russia proper, across the Donbass, across Donetsk, Lugansk, through Zaporozhye, through Kherson region all the way to Crimea. And that means that they can now send road and railway traffic directly from Russia to Crimea. But it also has, in my opinion, a further importance, because it means that the Russians can now send large numbers of men and supplies, heavy tanks, armoured vehicles, heavy artillery, rocket launchers, anti-aircraft missiles, all the apparatus of war, together with ammunition and fuel. They can send them by train, by rail, which is how the Russian army sustains itself in battle, all the way to Kherson, to the western front in Kherson region, which puts them within striking distance of Odessa and other places like Kryvyi Rog. So if the Russians are indeed planning, as most people believe, as I personally believe, an eventual offensive against Odessa, they've now established the logistical base in order to do that. I mean, Odessa is located quite far away from Russia itself. Now they've brought their forces very, very close to the point where they can strike at Odessa without having to worry that they're going to be outrunning their supply lines. So that's one important fact, and that's important, I think, in terms of the future evolution of the war. But there is another political consequence to this declaration of the land bridge, which is that, of course, what's now happening is that all of these regions, Kherson region, Zaporozhye region, they are being integrated economically into Russia. You know, the transport bridges are being constructed, and that makes it now, I think, indisputable that the Russians are not going to withdraw under any circumstances from these two regions. And in fact, we've now had a whole set of briefings by senior Russian officials who unusually spoke anonymously to the Russian media, specifically to the Russian newspaper Izvestia. And these anonymous Russian officials, it's an American practice to send anonymous officials, but the Russians have done it on this occasion. Anyway, these officials have said to Izvestia, and it's all over the media in Russia, that if there is going to be a resumption of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, then Ukraine must, as part of a diplomatic settlement of the conflict, now accept that it has lost Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, including, by the way, the city of Zaporozhye itself, that it's lost those as well as Donbass, as well as the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, which are now part of what Russia recognizes as the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. So the same sources pointed out that if Ukraine had implemented the Minsk II agreement, it would have had all of its territory back, bar Crimea. It would have simply had to accept autonomy for the territories at that time controlled by the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. The autonomy would not have extended to include the entirety of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Anyway, that was what would have been possible for Ukraine before the start of the war. After the start of the war, and up to the point of the collapse of the Istanbul negotiations, Ukraine could have settled. It would have lost Donbass, it would have lost Donetsk and Lugansk regions. It pulled back from the negotiations in Istanbul. It clawed back all its concessions there. It stopped negotiating. And now the price it's going to pay is that it's going to have to accept the loss of Kherson region and Zaporozhye regions as well, if the negotiations ever resume. So with every day that Ukraine delays, with every hour that it delays, it loses more and more of its territory, and it's not going to get any of it back.
Right, and that's actually my next question because I looked at that Izvestia article, and one of the parts of that article that has caused some controversy is the fact, well, two things. The fact that Peskov actually, I believe he denied it. So he said that everything's untrue. Okay, that's fine. But the Russian public, the hardliners in the Kremlin, as well as the Russian public, or a large portion, I don't want to say everyone, a large portion of the Russian public, senses they're starting to sense and feel the momentum is with them, and they're sensing an outright victory with regards to this war or special military operation, whatever you want to call it, and that leaves Odessa. And when that Izvesta article came out and it said Kherson, Zaporozhye, and that's now off the table, everyone said, okay, but what does this mean for Odessa? And some people are saying, does this mean that that we're not going to move further west? Does this mean that this is going to be the end of the operation? Or does it mean that if you don't negotiate now, Zelensky, you could possibly lose Odessa? Or does it mean, this is the trend of things that are going, and soon we're going to go all the way to Transnistria? I mean, it left kind of people hanging.
Yes.
And I think that was the part of the article that has caused a lot of discussion and and controversy to a certain extent. I don't want to say it's controversial, but to a certain extent, people are left kind of talking about Odessa. What do we do with Odessa? Or what's going to happen with Odessa is actually a better question.
Yes. I mean, let's first of all just briefly dispose of Peskov, because of course Peskov says, well, this isn't our policy at all. We made our counter proposals to the March proposals that Ukraine made. That's the point where we need to, start off, and it's up to Ukraine now to come back to the negotiating table. Now, of course, that's what Peskov says because, well, he doesn't want to. The Russians don't. The Kremlin doesn't want to be the party that is accused of wrecking negotiations. Because remember, if the Russians come out publicly with this sort of thing, it makes it easier for Zelensky to refuse to sit down and negotiate, and that would be difficult for the Russians from an international point of view. People always tend to forget that the Russians have to manage their diplomatic relations with other countries, with China, with India, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey. They mustn't appear to be embarked on a war of conquest. So they're coming along and saying, well, if Ukraine negotiates, we will sit down, we will proceed from where we left off in Istanbul. The reality, however, is what the anonymous officials say. And we can say that with confidence because look at the facts on the ground. Look at the way the currency in Kherson has been changed to the ruble. The Zaporozhye has been changed to the ruble. Look at the way Russian passports, are being issued to the people there. Look at the new administrations that have been set up there. And last but not least, look at the road and railway links that Shoigu was talking about. You don't do these things if you're intending eventually just to pull out of these places. So, I mean, the facts on the ground support what the anonymous sources in Izvestia are saying. Now, about Odessa, this is where it becomes, I think, very important to understand the position, because I don't think anybody in Moscow actually believes that the Ukrainians at the moment are prepared to sit down and talk. I think the universal expectation in Moscow is that even after Ukraine loses Donbass, the Ukrainians are going to continue the war. Zelensky's boxed himself in. He made another defiant speech in which he said that Ukraine is going to fight until victory. So I think from a Russian point of view, if Zelensky came along, in the next day or so and said, look, I'm prepared to sit down, I'm prepared to talk, I'm prepared to give up Kherson and Zaporozhye, I'm prepared to demilitarize as you want, I'm prepared to to carry out this cleansing of Ukraine's internal political system that you're talking about. I'm being careful in my choice of words. If that were to happen, it would put the Russians in a certain difficulties. But the reality is that nobody in Moscow expects that, and that leaves open the way for further Russian advances. And I come back to the first part of this program, which is that part of the logic of creating this land bridge, this road and rail corridor, is to bring the Russians close to Odessa. Now, in some respects, they're close to Odessa already. They're not far from Nikolaev. By the way, the British Ministry of Defense continues to claim that Ukraine's counteroffensive against the Kherson region has recaptured some territory. This after the Ukrainians themselves admitted that they've been forced to pull back. This is one of the things that the British constantly do. The British Reuters is continuing to claim that the Ukrainians are trying to hold on to the ground they recaptured in Severodonetsk. This is after the Ukrainians themselves have admitted that they pulled out from Severodonetsk. The British do themselves no favours by clinging on to these fictions. But anyway, the Russian army is close to Nikolaev and within striking distance of Odessa. But Odessa is presumed to be heavily defended. They would probably need a much bigger logistics tail to conduct a sustained offensive to recapture it. The land bridge puts them in a position to do that. And the fact that they've taken all that trouble to set it up and have done it so fast suggests to me that they do indeed have Odessa in their sights. The other thing that suggests that to me as well is that recently the Russian military have been talking up the fact that they've got so many amphibious warfare ships in the Black Sea. Why would they do that if they weren't planning some kind of amphibious warfare landing? Again, that points to Odessa. And lastly, we've had further reports that the Sukhoi 57 fifth generation fighter is now operating in the skies over Ukraine. It's basically carrying out not so much strike functions as a sort of surveillance functions, but again that suggests a military escalation. And given that Russia's eyes in the sky are supposed to be less good around the airspace over Odessa, the fact that the Sukhoi 57 is now operating over Ukraine does suggest that they're starting to monitor the airspace around Odessa more closely. So yes, there is this momentum, this sense in Russia that the momentum is with them, that they're advancing. Why should they stop? I think Putin would be facing a great deal of criticism if he stopped before reaching Odessa. For Russians, as I've said many times, Odessa is a totemic city. It's very important symbolically. It's also the place, of course, where there was a gruesome massacre of people in the trade union building back in 2014, which is well remembered in Russia itself. So I think he would face a lot of criticism if he stopped at Odessa before, if this operation stopped before taking Odessa. I can't imagine that it will stop before Odessa is taken. In fact, I'm not sure it will stop even after then. But certainly Odessa, I would have thought, is high on the list of prizes that the Russians intend to take.
Yeah. The irony of all of this is that if the collective West really wants regime change in Russia, if they really want to damage and hurt Putin, the best thing they could do is for Zelensky to come to the negotiating table and say, yeah, I agree with everything that you guys are saying, but the line is where you are right now, so Odessa stays with us. I think that would be the best way to damage Putin. That would put Putin in a predicament, diplomatically and at home. That would be the best course of action for Zelensky.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the irony of it. But there's also one more clue before we end this video. There's one more clue with the fact that the Russians are going to move towards Odessa, I believe, and that is that even Zelensky understands this. That's why he's not demining much of the Black Sea, because he has come out with statements pretty much saying that if I demine the Black Sea, then the Russians are going to move on Odessa. And that's why you have the whole grain and wheat. And even Lavrov said as much. They don't want to demine it because they're afraid that we're going to move on Odessa if we demine the area around Odessa with regards to the wheat and the grain shortages and exporting. So, okay, yeah.
You're absolutely right on both points. I mean, the first point is actually brilliant. It's absolutely true. Again, it highlights the extent to which the West, the collective West, is profoundly ignorant and profoundly lacking in understanding of Russian public sentiment, of public opinion. Of course, they don't accept that Russia has a public opinion. But I mean, which we've discussed in other programs. But you're absolutely right. If the Russian army stops and doesn't march on Odessa, Putin is going to face severe political problems at home.
He's in a box.
He's in a box. He would be in a box. The communists, in particular, would be making massive hay out of this. But they don't understand that, and on the contrary, they are telling Zelensky to hold on to the bitter end. And of course, that plays exactly into the hardliners' hands, and I suspect into Putin's hands. But there we are. That's the mistake you're making. And as to Zelensky, not demining Odessa because he's worried of a Russian amphibious strike on Odessa, I'm afraid I completely agree. The other telltale sign is that the Russians have now apparently massively reinforced the defences of Snake Island. They've apparently installed an S-400 anti-aircraft missile system there, along with all kinds of other systems. And again, why would they want to do that? Why would they want to build this massive fortress, if you like, so close to Odessa, if they weren't interested in Odessa itself?
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. theduran.locals.com, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.